the kicker one, which really kind of made me decide I wanted to retire, was a mother who killed both her children in her vehicle. One was 8 months old, the other was maybe 7 or 8 years old. And she duct taped both their heads completely, face, mouth, nose, all hair, everything, just like mummified. She duct taped their wrists together and basically suffocated them. And she sat in the vehicle while they died.
Lisa, thank you for being here today. Your journey with the badge began in July of 1997 as a patrol officer with the University of Medicine and Dentistry Police Department. In July of 1999, you accepted a position as a detective with the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office. You were promoted to sergeant in 2004 and lieutenant in 2017. During the course of your career, you were assigned to your agency's Sex Crimes and Child Abuse Unit, the Crime Scene Unit, the Somerset County Fire Investigation Task Force, where you served as the unit commander from 2017 to 2022, the Dive Rescue and Recovery Team, the Fugitive Task Force, the Police Academy, the Evidence Unit, and your agency's Accreditation Team. Additionally, you were a member of the New Jersey Sex Crimes Officers Association, where you served as the secretary, treasurer, and president, and the New Jersey Crime Scene Officers Association, where you were a member of the executive board and served as the training coordinator. You retired from the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office in July of 2022. Lisa, thank you for agreeing to share your story.
Thank you.
So, what drew you to law enforcement? Why did you decide to get involved and start a law enforcement career?
You know, if you asked me in my younger years if I ever wanted to be a cop, the answer would be no. So I had no desire to go into law enforcement. However, after college, I was held at gunpoint in a shopping mall parking lot. And that event and what occurred after that put me on the trajectory to become a police officer.
So you started out as a college police officer. Mm-hmm. And was that just the first agency to call you, or did you deliberately test for that agency? How did that come about?
Yeah, no, it was opportunity. It was a place that was looking for female officers, because back then there weren't a lot. And because there was an opportunity, I took it.
So you went to the police academy for that agency.
Correct.
And then eventually there's an opportunity to go to the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office right as a detective right away, correct?
Correct.
Now, did you have to go to another academy for that job?
No.
So going back to your academy time a little bit, do you remember anything about that? Was it a community academy, residential academy? What was that experience like?
So it was New Jersey State Police Academy. So we were taught by troopers, state troopers, but it was for municipal police officers. So it was sleepaway. The troopers were very hardcore. It was very paramilitary. They basically had us 24/7, 5 days a week. We went home Saturdays and Sundays only. So it was a lot of tossing rooms and vehicle inspections and a lot of overnight nonsense, in addition to very hard PT, a lot of academics, overnight roving guard details. You know, it was like being in the military.
Had you had any military experience?
No.
So was it quite a culture shock to you?
Yes, it was.
So you end up, you don't have to go to another academy. You end up at the Somerset County Prosecutor's Office. What is that agency like, and what are the responsibilities attached to that agency?
So the Prosecutor's Office is the chief law enforcement agency of the county. And each county within New Jersey has its own prosecutor's office. In Somerset County, there was 21 municipalities that were in the county. So we would have detectives that would, if there was any major crime that came in one of the municipalities, we would do the investigation.
How many investigators? Now, it's just detectives?
It's detectives, and then we also have a prosecuting staff, and then we have an administrative staff.
How many detectives do you remember?
About 50.
Oh, wow. So pretty big, pretty big. Was there a field training program when you got there?
Kind of. You had to go through the SOPs and you had to ride with somebody on your first few investigations. But really, it was just throw you to the wolves and figure it out.
Did most of the people that were at that agency, did most of them come from another law enforcement agency, or were there some that just started there and that was their first experience?
Back then, when I first started, most of them came from other departments, primarily municipal police departments or state departments. And the prosecutor's office was like a stepping stone to go into investigations. As the years went on, then it was people with no law enforcement experience, and they would get hired as agents within the prosecutor's office, and then the office would send them to the police academy.
So kind of take me through the trajectory of your career, because I'd be honest, from the outside looking in, I had no idea that someone that was an investigator with the Somerset, with any prosecutor's office, would have the opportunity to do as many things as you did. So kind of that 30,000 foot perspective.
So the prosecutor's office, we had all major crimes investigations. So you had major crimes to include like homicides or armed robberies. You had sex crimes, child abuse. You had special investigations, computer crimes. You had computer forensics. You had the cyber crimes, so like the online pedophiles. We had a special unit for that. We also had a police academy where we trained police, parole, and correction recruits. We had a fugitive unit. We had a dive rescue team. We had a SWAT team. So it was a multifaceted kind of department where the draw for other people was to come in and nothing ever got stale, because you can go and have all these different experiences that you basically couldn't get in a municipality. So you eventually were promoted to sergeant and promoted to lieutenant. What are the responsibilities associated with each of those ranks? So with my rank, when I first got promoted to sergeant, was to supervise the child abuse, sex crimes and child abuse unit. And that was for an extended period of time. I served 8 years there. And then I was transferred to the police academy. So then I was in charge of supervising different areas of it. It was the administrative side, it was the continuation side, and then ultimately it was the recruit side. Was your entire career plain clothes, or were there parts of your career where you were a uniformed officer? The police academy, I was uniform. And then our outside details, like we did road jobs, or we did task force jobs, we would wear uniform. If we did any kind of protection details, we would be in uniform. So when you look back at your time with the prosecutor's office, what were some of the high points of your career? There were a lot of high points. One in particular, I had an opportunity to extradite a man named Paul Timindakwas. And he was the brother of Jesse Timindakwas, who was the murderer. He murdered and sexually assaulted his neighbor, Megan Kanka. And Megan Kanka, that case ultimately turned into what's called Megan's Law. Megan's Law started in New Jersey. Now, I didn't have an opportunity to investigate that because I wasn't on the job yet. But when Megan's Law first started, I was the one who was implementing it in our county. So now, fast forward, 10 or so years later, I'm extraditing the brother of the man who killed Megan. He was found in Glasgow, Montana, and he was considered a fugitive. However, he wasn't one of our cases. He had assaulted not only his daughter, but another girl, another juvenile. He was incarcerated, got out of jail, and was on supervision for life. One of his parole officers found pornography in his apartment. It wasn't child porn, it was adult porn. And because of that, it was a violation of his parole. So he was set to go for his hearing. He ended up going to Montana so that he can sell some land. He was part Native American. It was wintertime, and while he was there trying to sell his land, he got into a car accident, veered off the road, called the police. Police came and ran him, found his warrants, and put him in jail. So what was so fascinating about this experience was I had 18 hours of travel, 2 airplane rides and a 5-hour drive from Glasgow to the airport to ask this man questions about why he offended against his daughter and the other girl, what his family life was like, what was his brother like, what were his parents like, basically everything and anything that I can ask without having to worry about Miranda rights. He was an open book. He was very telling of, how he, if it wasn't for being incarcerated, he wouldn't have survived his brain cancer. How when he was incarcerated, what he learned about diesel engines, and he's talking about that while he's on the plane. He was talking about how his parents gave him drugs for the first time at age 10, how his brother had very low mental capacity. I mean, it was just a phenomenal experience to be able to ask the questions that most officers can't ask because of Miranda.
So do you think that experience helped you with future cases in any way, and how you looked at cases or maybe conducted interviews?
Yeah, I mean, because you get to see a more personal side, not that you have a personal attachment, but you can see the environment and family and how it impacts how people go through life.
Do you have any idea where he's at today?
No.
So let's change gears a little bit, and this may take you back to your time as a police officer at the college, because I'm not sure how many traffic stops you actually did with the prosecutor's office, but is there a traffic stop that kind of stands out in your mind or maybe is memorable for any reason?
Yeah, so the prosecutor's office, we don't do Title 39. Okay. In my limited days at the university, because I was only there for less than 2 years, they weren't very keen on proactive work. However, I was positioned in a spot that I knew that my mother would pass on a daily basis to go to work, and I waited for her to pass by. And I put my lights on, and I put my cover on, and I walk up to the vehicle, and I could see she's shaking, and she's reaching out, and she's, I'm sorry, officer. And I said, license, registration, insurance. And she goes to reach for it, and I'm like, Ma, what are you doing? It's me. And she's like, oh my God, I was wondering why that officer was so little.
Now, just because you're sitting down, how tall are you?
5'3.5".
And she didn't recognize you?
Didn't recognize me.
That's incredible. Is there a particular call or incident that stands out in your memory when you look back at your career?
Yeah, so the last 5 years of my career, I was in charge of the crime scene and arson unit. And the last pretty much year and a half before I decided to retire, we had several baby deaths. We had a young girl who was killed in a fire. Accidental fire, but still. We had a young boy who his mother slit his throat while he was sleeping. And then the kicker one, which really kind of made me decide I wanted to retire, was a mother who killed both her children in her vehicle. One was 8 months old, the other was maybe 7 or 8 years old. And she duct taped both their heads completely, face, mouth, nose, all hair, everything, just like mummified. She duct taped their wrists together and basically suffocated them. And she sat in the vehicle while they died, while they tried to scream and squirmed. She also tried but failed to duct tape herself to the steering wheel. So I guess her plan was to kill her kids and herself, but she failed at that. So she ended up, after they died, driving off, veered off a road. Bystander came, helped her out. Police came. Obviously, it was a crime scene. But to see a baby, completely duct taped and blue, you can't see the face, but you can see the body, and the 8-year-old girl, and to know that a mother can do that. Now there was mental illness there, but that was probably the worst thing that I've ever had to see and investigate.
So I know that your priority is investigating that case, and that's the priority of your agency. And oftentimes, some agencies do a better job than others in taking care of their people. So when you experience a series of incidents like that with babies and very young children, what attention do you get, if any?
In the beginning, middle, and almost to the end of my career, none. But towards the last few years, and I think it was because there were so many child deaths, the department did offer services. Now, it wasn't mandatory, and most people who investigated those cases, kind of took the ego side and said, no, I'm good, I'm fine. So it was offered, but it wasn't really made to be that important. It wasn't made to be like, you really need to do this. It was kind of like, do you want to do this? And most officers said no.
Did you have children at the time?
I did. One was 19, 20. The other was probably 14, 15.
Does that have an impact on you when you bring that home, or an impact on the family?
It does. And my boys obviously grew up with me in law enforcement. And I often would share stories with them, not the really devastating ones, but I would share a lot of stories. The particular case that I spoke about on that day, I didn't say anything other than it was a really bad case and there was children and I need some hugs. And they both just dropped everything, hugs, let me kind of cry in their shoulder and didn't ask any other questions. But they knew. They knew it was bad.
So again, changing gears and not to move quickly away from that, but has there ever been something that you've done and you later realized that it probably wasn't the best idea?
Yeah, so at this point I was a lieutenant, and being a female supervisor, unfortunately of male officer subordinates who have more experience in the expertise of crime scene, not necessarily the expertise of law enforcement in general, but just of that particular thing. And this particular detective didn't like to be supervised at all, let alone by a woman. And we had worked a case, and I had made a comment about, get your own stuff kind of thing. It was just a very, what I thought was a generic statement, but he took it to me bullying him, me being not a nice person. And he ended up making complaint to Internal Affairs about how I was treating him. So there are a whole bunch of other factors that are involved in that, and being that it's an IA, I don't feel it appropriate. However, looking back on that, I could have handled him differently, different personalities. It was kind of an eye-opener for me as a lieutenant, a higher-up supervisor, on dealing with personalities that I had never had to deal with before in my agency.
So not getting into the IA piece of it, but after that, did you continue to supervise him, and
Yes.
Was there anything that you did differently?
Yes. Oh, yeah. And we actually had, a conversation about it, and kind of like, let's start new and make it work. We were both close to retirement, so it was easy to do that. But the way that I spoke to him and the way that I even spoke to other people, not saying that I was a bully or mean, but knowing that the personalities are so different amongst your staff that you can't treat them all the same. You know, one might be a jokester. You can't do that to somebody who's not, right? So it changed the way I supervised everybody.
What are some of your best memories of your law enforcement career?
The best stories, the really good times was when I was a drill instructor at the police academy. There was always a story. There was always something funny that somebody does or stupid that somebody does, and that you can, as a drill instructor, just kind of, exploit them on because they do stupid things.
And for example?
So there was one recruit, and I'll make up a name.
Okay.
Okay. There was one recruit, we'll call him Peters, Recruit Peters. So I'm in charge of the recruit training, and I get a voicemail message from his mother. And they were at the point in the academy where they had leveled up and they were able to put patches on their sleeves. So I get a voicemail from her saying, kind of like this: I don't understand why he needs to put these patches on. I don't know where they go. I need to know exactly where they go because I'm the one who's going to be sewing them on. Call me back. Kind of like that, right? So now they're all adults, right? They may be living at home, but they need to do their own thing and take care of themselves. So now later on in that afternoon, it's PT time. And there's probably about 90 recruits all together. There was the police class and the corrections class. And they're stretching on their own, and I call Recruit Peters up to the front. And Recruit Peter comes up, runs up, "Ma'am, yes, ma'am." And I'm saying loud enough that the other recruits can hear it, but softly enough that it's supposed to be between the two of us. And I was like, "Recruit Peters, tell me why your mother would be calling me about your patches that you're supposed to be putting on." "Ma'am, I don't know, ma'am." "Recruit Peters, does your mother make you lunch?" "Ma'am, no, ma'am." Because, she did. "Does your mother wash your clothes?" "Ma'am, no, ma'am." "Does your mommy tuck you into bed at night?" "Ma'am, no, ma'am." "Then why, Recruit Peters, is your mother calling me, asking me where your patches need to go?" "Ma'am, I don't know, ma'am." I go, "Well, you need to grow up." I go, "But for today, for our run, which was through the neighborhood, and, probably about a 4-mile run, you're going to refer to me as Mommy, yes, Mommy, and not Ma'am, yes, ma'am." "Mommy, yes, Mommy." So now we're out on the run, and I said, "Recruit Peters, even though he was an okay runner, you're the last one in line at all times, unless I call you. I'm in the front." So, and there's a lot of recruits in between. So I called him up, "Recruit Peters, Mommy, yes, Mommy." And he runs from the back to the front, up to me the whole way, sprinting. Never mind. So then he'd have to run back to the back. And we'd get to like a hill, and I'd be like, "Recruit Peters." And you'd hear, "Mommy, yes, Mommy." And he's sprinting up the hill, gets to the front, gets to me. Never mind. We did that the whole run. It was funny, but I'll tell you, at graduation, his mother would not even look at me.
Now, did you ever come across Recruit Peters ever again?
I have, and civil, but not personable like the other recruits. The other recruits are like, "Hey, how's it going? How's it been?" Hugs and all the things. But not him.
So I want to kind of set the stage for your role as a drill instructor in the academy. So what is your uniform of the day? What's that look? And I hope you can provide me with a picture so as you're describing it, I can put it up on the screen.
So I have a really interesting picture
Okay.
that was actually in a newspaper.
Okay.
We were mostly BDUs, right? We wore Class A's for graduation and special occasions, but mostly it was BDU pants. We did have the Smokey the Bear kind of cover with our BDUs. And the recruits were in uniform. I mean, we were paramilitary. And again, not having any military experience, it was a whole new gig for me. But apparently I did well at yelling. So I was yelling at, men twice the size that had just came back from the war,
Yeah. Wow. And now, how long did you do that for?
10 years.
And probably your favorite part of your career, would you say?
The favorite in that it had the most good times,
Yeah.
right? There's no death.
Yeah.
You might be kicking somebody out of the academy. There might be some difficult times, but it's not somber. There was always something joyous about it. And you're watching these men and women go from buffoons, basically, to squared away, fit, strong people. And then even as the years went on, you started to see these people that you trained leading their organizations, getting promoted, sergeant, lieutenant. I have a recruit now who's the chief, so you feel pride.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So is there someone in your career that you look to, and maybe they never knew it, but that you, or someone or people perhaps, that you look to as a mentor?
Yeah. In the beginning of my career, I had a captain, and I'm going to say his name because he's worthy of it. His name is Nick Magos, and he started out as, I believe, a sergeant when I started, and he quickly went through the ranks. Ultimately, was posthumously promoted to deputy chief, but captain is what I remember him as. And he was in charge of several units, but was my supervisor for many years. And he was also in charge of the dive rescue team, which I was on for 9-10 years. And he was a man who was the pillar of strength. He had a confidence about him, but was also very charismatic. The issues that would come along, and he would treat you with compassion, and he would problem solve in a way that, was non-judgmental and was ways that you wouldn't necessarily think of. He's really like a thinker, a critical thinker, but yet a compassionate man. And to me, he stood like 9 feet tall, but he was probably 6'5", I don't know. And, just big and strong, but a bear, teddy bear, in charge of the SWAT team. Very well known in the county, in the state, very highly recognized. He was a good man. And he helped me through a lot because I was young in my career. I was young as a supervisor, and to kind of navigate through that, not only just being new in the career, but new as supervising, new in the career. Mm-hmm. I ultimately named my son after him. Nick Magos had passed away. I was probably 7 months pregnant with my youngest son. And I remember getting the call that he had passed away. He battled cancer for several months, but got the call that he had passed away. And at the time, I said to my husband, because we hadn't come up with a name, I want to name our son after Nick. So I now have a Nick.
Wow.
Yeah. And he never knew because he passed away. Obviously he didn't know that I named my son after him.
Now, is there a story about his son that you want to share?
So his son, when Nick Sr. passed away, his son was a young kid. And I don't believe he ever remembered who I was, right? Because he was very young. I hadn't seen him for several years. There was no opportunity to. His family, we would do fundraisers for his father. Maybe I would see him there. But as time went on, probably the last 10 years, I had never seen him. My younger son was recently a senior in high school, and he was going through some rough times. He had 2 separate times his car was hit and severely damaged. The second time it was by a friend. The first time it was a hit and run. A few weeks later he gets into a fight and we're in the hospital. His face is all blown out. And he's not an emotional kid, but he got emotional. He couldn't understand why all these things were happening to him. Why, bad things never really happened to my younger son. So he had a hard time processing the emotional turmoil that he was going through. And it was the day after he was in the emergency room after the fight, and there's a knock at my door. And I open the door, and it is Nick Magos Jr. So Nick Magos, his son, is now an adult at my house. And I couldn't figure out why. Mm-hmm. At that moment, it didn't matter why. I, of course, am like, oh my God, you're Nick Magos, because he's got the N Magos on his shirt. Oh my God, you're Nick Magos, his son. How have you been? Your father this. I love your dad. You might name my son after your dad. It was almost like I tried to catch him up on everything since he was a little boy. And, he was like, yeah, I remember you. And I'm like, no, there's no way you can remember me. So anyway, I said, my son is named after your dad. Can I introduce you? Because they've never met. Mm-hmm. So my son comes down and they shake hands and they have a moment and all that. And my son knew that he was named after Nick Magos, but in that moment, he didn't realize that that was Nick Magos' son. Like, it just didn't click to him. So anyway, my younger one goes back in the house, and I ultimately find out why he was knocking at my door. And it was because they were getting signatures from residents to build a new firehouse within the community. But there was, 10 other people in knocking on doors, but he happened to be at mine. So of course I'm thinking it's a universal sign, right? He leaves, I go up to my son. I'm highly emotional, thinking that there's somehow a connection as to why my son's going through all this turmoil, can't understand why, he's trying to process it, and all of a sudden the man who he's named after, his son, shows up at my house. And I reminded my son at that point that is his father, is who you're named after. And I reiterated to him all the reasons why I named him after Nick Magos. And I said to him, I don't know if this makes you feel any better, that there's a reason, or at least it seemed like there's a reason why he was sent to you at this point in your life. And he goes, it really does. And I said, it's kind of like everything's gonna be okay. Like, Nick Magos is an angel kind of watching over you. And even though you're going through some rough times, and obviously there's something to learn from it, but you're gonna be okay. And he was like, yeah, I believe that. So, Nick Magos may not have ever met my son, but I believe that he has a power, a watch, if you will, over my son.
You've talked about 2 ways that you've given 2 examples on how really the job has impacted your family. The first was when you came home from the death of those 2 babies and the mother attempting to kill herself, and then Nick Magos. Has the job impacted your family in any other way? Have you seen a long-term impact? Is it in any way shaped who your kids are, or how they've lived their lives?
Well, how they've lived their lives, because they're good kids, and they always knew that mom or dad, because Nick's father was also a police officer, always knew somebody. So they behaved, right? Or at least behaved enough. We'll leave it at that. However, I will say that my older son was a toddler when I first went into the sex crimes and child abuse unit. And I was there for 8 years. So for 8 years-ish, he wasn't allowed to do a lot of things. You know, he basically grew up thinking that everybody was a pedophile. And we joke about it today. But there were times when, you know, his friend would have a birthday party at the YMCA, and I would say, no, you can't go. Because we had just got a case or a referral or some kind of suspicious person lurking in bathrooms looking at young boys while they shower. You know, you can't go to that party. So he was angry with me for a while until he got old enough, and I explained to him. I was very open with my boys about reasons why I made certain decisions. Because sometimes when you just know too much, you know, it doesn't matter what they think, it's what you know. So my younger one grew up thinking everybody was a pedophile. I mean, my older one. My younger one was a toddler to adolescence when I was a drill instructor. So he suffered the wrath of the drill instructor voice all the time, right? Which he jokes about that, yeah, you know, my brother thinks everybody's a pedophile, but I got yelled at all the time.
Do you have any regrets when you look back at your career?
No, everything was supposed to happen exactly the way that it did.
So there comes a time where you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I'm sure it just wasn't one thing, but there comes a point in your career where you decide, you know what, I think it's time to retire. What was that? What caused you to make that decision?
You know, it was probably the events, right? The 5 years in crime scene. And you get to a point where, and people tell you this all the time, when you know, you know. And I didn't know what that meant until one day I said, I don't want to do this anymore.
Do you miss the job?
No. I miss some of the people, but I don't miss the job.
So what are you doing now?
So prior to going into law enforcement, I was held at gunpoint. And as a result of that, I ended up getting a black belt in a mixed martial art, and then subsequently, and still train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but currently have a purple belt in that. But when I first started in law enforcement, I created self-defense and empowerment seminars. And I did them as part of my job all throughout my career. So pretty much over the last 25 years. And well received, people love them, they keep on giving. When I retired, I made that a business. So I do self-defense and empowerment seminars for mostly women and teenagers. I do them for colleges, both men and women. And I also do personal training, which I started in 2010 when I was running the recruit police physical training program. I wanted to make their physical training program better, so I went and became a personal trainer. So I currently have a business where I do personal training and I do self-defense seminars.
And that personal training left to a period of time where you actually competed?
I did. I did a lot of competitions. I'm going to say the one that I'm most proud of was a bodybuilding competition. It was Fit Body and Figure. I competed for 4 years and ultimately received a pro card. And then COVID hit and I ate ice cream and it was all over.
So what's the name of your company?
Epoch Fitness NJ.
And NJ because it's in New Jersey?
Right.
And how would somebody find you on social media?
Epoch Fitness NJ as my Instagram and my Facebook, as well as my website.
Awesome. So do you have any parting words of advice? And it can be for one of these following three groups or all three. Somebody that's looking at doing the job, somebody who's maybe in that rut halfway through their career, or somebody who's trying to make that decision whether or not it's time to retire.
So the career ebbs and flows, right? What you think is a bad time right now, in 2 years could be the best part of your career. So for those that are in that midst of, and that kind of like, I don't want to do this anymore, fight through, you'll be fine, get to the end of your career, don't retire before. But when you're coming to the end of your career, know that the other side is completely magical. Plan for it, know what you want to do, but don't hold on to the job because you think that's all you have. It's so much better on the other side.
Lisa, thank you for the advice, and thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.